Hello, everyone, and welcome to your final lecture for week 4 in technical writing. This one is going to cover evaluations, and I'll bring up my slideshow. I just wanted to start by just defining what an evaluation is. And so here it is as a verb to determine the importance, effectiveness, or worth of, assess, evaluate, and then the example there, assess, and then the example is evaluate teacher performance, which you might be familiar with from your end of the semester surveys. I wanted to include the etymology here, where the word comes from. So it looks like the root is value. And so when you're thinking about evaluation, you're really thinking about that root there. And that's from the American Heritage Dictionary. So yeah, what are evaluations? This slide comes from a book I really like. That's a lot more about rhetoric than technical writing, but it's called Everything's an Argument by Lunsford, and a bunch of her colleagues chipped in as well. So I'll put the citation below. But here are some ways that they think about evaluations. So first, they say that casual arguments, kind of everyday things, are participating in some degree of evaluation. So outfits, for example, like when you wake up and maybe it's a relaxing day at home, you have a different set of evaluations for your outfits relative to if you have a job interview or if you're going out and going to class. Same thing if, we have ways in our minds probably of evaluating coffee shops. Does this place have the best lattes might be the first question, but you might also be thinking about the atmosphere. Does it have good music? Or, maybe you're looking for a coffee shop where you can study and you want a place that's a little bit quieter. So yeah, and then playlists. You've probably had this debate internally. What's a good playlist for a road trip this summer, or versus a good playlist to sit and study. And so I think a good reason for starting their definition of evaluations like that is to show they aren't one standard set of things. The way you're going to evaluate something will change based on the context a lot, to get back to our rhetorical conversation terms. From there, they say we can kind of go from these unconscious everyday kinds of evaluations and think about more conscious ones. And then when we do that, if we sit down and we really say, what's a good coffee shop for studying in, you might sit down and actually write objective criteria for doing it. You might sit down and say, what looks good for a job interview, and I need to wear particular pieces of clothing and of particular quality. And so you can bring them from the unconscious to the conscious, but really what you're doing every day is making little small evaluations throughout the day. They can be cultural too. I wrote down a couple articles you find online. Maybe you've seen these before, but 10 best smartphones from any of the tech websites. I think World's Handsomest Man from People magazine. Um, you see all sorts of cultural codes embedded in these, right? Like the best smartphones are usually the ones that have the most productivity. Like you see them talking about how you can email and maybe email and write on a Word document on your phone at the same time, or text people and also be in a Zoom call separately. That shows us that we have a culture of productivity. But then again, you might see smartphones that say, this can help you upload your content to Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, maybe if that's even still a thing. You can upload it to all of those things all at once, and then you see, hey, this is kind of like a smartphones for influencers or people involved in that culture. So, yeah, that's the way that culture comes out in evaluations. And then, yeah, World's Handsomest Man. In people, it's always like, right? It's always like wealthy people. You never see just like an average guy who makes it into the list. And so you start to see kind of cultural considerations there, like, more like who's most famous, maybe who's richest. And you start to uncover some of the cultural expectations of evaluations as well. In business and in academia, like I said, as you've seen, they become kind of formalized. So you can think of grades. Can be, I guess, more or less fair, right? For other classes, The difference between a B minus and a C plus could be some kind of subjective thing by the professor. And then, if you think of my course, it's a little bit more formal, where you know exactly how much you have to do in order to receive which particular grade. And so that's a way that we see evaluations become formalized. Again, kind of go from unconscious kind of subjectivity to consciousness. And then in the workplace, performance evaluations, that's one we're going to work with this week. I'm not sure if everyone's had these yet, but maybe if you've had your first job, you've had a conversation with your supervisor where they lay out how you've been doing and what kinds of things you can improve. And so yeah, kind of as I said with culture, where we were uncovering some of the cultural considerations behind evaluation, you can uncover the values and motives of the organization as well by looking at the types of criteria they use in evaluation, right? So if being timely is part of your evaluation, your performance evaluation, then hey, this is a punctual organization, a punctual business I work for. But then, yeah, you might think about other more subjective stuff, like are they kind to customers? Do they greet customers with a smile? These kinds of things start to tell you a little bit more about the organization you work in and what some of their values might be. And then criteria themselves can be quantitative or qualitative. For example, in class here, we have quantitative criteria for sure. You're going to get a grade somewhere between an F and an A. But on performance reviews, you might see it scored 1 through 10 or 1 through 5. I don't think any of these are particularly better than the other, depending on the context. They're just ways that it can be kind of quantified and explained very directly. But evaluation can also be qualitative. Maybe you've seen at the end of a form for feedback, additional comments here. And there's no way to put a number to that, but the person reading it might get a little bit more of the qualitative information about your experience with whatever you're evaluating. And so, yeah, on that topic of criteria, I wanted to show you an example of something that makes for bad criteria. If we have any business or finance people in the course, you might be familiar with this one, but this is the Alexander case study, where you've been given this guy Alexander's performance review, and you need to review him at work. I guess I'll jump to the end quickly, but here's a piece of note you receive. Your higher ups say they're worried that Alex is going to resign if his score is anything less than a 4. And so these are the criteria that are given, or this is the scoring that is given for you to consider. 1 says needs improvement in all areas. Individuals receiving this evaluation are often terminated. So 1 you can kind of be fine with because it's lower than 4, and so he's going to leave either way with a 1. But there are problems, right, with this piece of criteria. Like, what does it mean that are often terminated? Does that mean always terminated? Is he always going to quit in this case, or is it just something I fear? 2, needs improvement in some areas, meets expectations in some areas. Again, it's a very vague kind of score to give somebody a 2, because, what's the definition of some areas, and how can someone both need improvement and meet expectations if you only have one number to give? 3, meets expectations in most areas, but not ready for promotion. And so if they're meeting expectations, why are they not ready? Fully meets expectations and exceeds expectations in some areas, on track for promotion, but could wait a year. Kind of another weird one. And then exceeds expectations, should be promoted this year. And then again, you have that question of what does it mean that he should be? And so this is kind of a case study in bad criteria presentation. And I'll tell you why in just a second. So what makes good criteria? What makes good criteria is that when I'm reading through your scoring or I'm reading through your list, I know exactly which traits, which accomplishments, and which ones specifically are being evaluated. And so when we look back on this scoring, we see a lot of most and some, and these aren't very clear criteria for scoring somebody. You should consider here the values, motives, and preferences of the institution. So again, like I said, the evaluative criteria on something are going to tell you a lot about the institution. And so this one, I guess we would say they prefer meeting expectations is kind of the most important thing, right? That comes up in almost all of these. Um, but again, it's kind of vague in terms of what it means to meet those. So being very specific is makes for better criteria. Laid out on a logical scale, many different scales work. Like I said at the beginning, I think 1 through 10 is good. I think 1 through 5 is good. 5 stars you can think of like Yelp. This is called a Likert scale. Maybe you've seen this if you've ever taken a survey. But basically a 5-point scale that says starts with very bad, goes to bad, goes to neutral, good, and very good. And so you get a nice kind of cross section of different ways of evaluating something. And do not bias the evaluator. Stay objective. And so when we look at this criteria, we're biased from the very beginning, right? We know we might cost this person his job. We might cost the organization a really good employee. But maybe at 3 they meet expectations. They're just not ready. But we've been biased. We think they have to be 4 or above. And so the ways you do this, so that was my example there. And then in qualitative feedback, you don't ask very direct questions about somebody, but maybe you ask these kind of open-ended questions like, do you have additional comments, or can you list anything this person did wrong? And so that's all I got on evaluations. Pretty simple concepts. Maybe you've seen evaluations around and you've done lots of surveys, or like I said, you've filled out this kind of thing to evaluate your professors anyway. But it's to me, it's definitely a piece of technical writing. Most times it's laid out on a list. You have to follow the headings, and they're going to contrast stuff to make it stand out. So I think it has a lot of those traits of technical writing that we see elsewhere. And so in one of your assignments this week, I'm going to ask you to practice a little bit with a job evaluation. It'll be a kind of cool job that you get to think up for yourself. So I'm hoping you'll have a little bit of fun with it too. But that's all the lectures for this week. As always, I really appreciate your time. And as always, I really look forward to grading your assignments. This group comes up with some really great stuff. So yeah, have a good rest of your week or weekend whenever you're watching this. And yeah, look out for my grades and comments. Thanks, everyone.